We are okay, great. We are very happy. We are lucky people today because we have 4 papers on fertility. So it's really the core of population economics. It's the production of children and how the production of children interacts with economic circumstances. So we will start. So for each paper, it will be 20 minutes and then 10 minutes of questions and answers. And the first paper is by Radbeck Zumashev, Social Externalities, Endogenous Childcare Cost and Fertility Choice. So please, the floor is yours.
I'll start sharing the screen then.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me well then. So it is a joint work with my co-author, UCLouvain, and so the idea to work on this paper was kind of motivated by 3 points we kind of observed while came up to I noticed while reading the literature. So I mean, I'm not, because I thought that the time will be shorter than actually it is. So I didn't really include the names. So, but it is given in the paper anyway. So there are 3 points we observed in the literature that was raised. That first, we know that because of this demographic transition, the fertility rates were falling, but the concern was that this decline was too steep to be explained by, for example, this quality-quantity trade-off. And the second point was that if you draw this relationship between income and fertility, then you can see that over time these curves are shifting. And the third point we noticed was that there is sort of a reversal of this decline in fertility in high-income countries. And there were a few works that kind of documented this phenomenon and kind of raised the kind of concerns why it is happening and what is driving this sort of reversal. So to tackle this or put all these things together and try to explain, we kind of then started working on kind of a model which will be then kind of help us to explain, hopefully. So, but before going to the model, let me just show a bit of evidence that kind of relates to these points. First, steepness and the shifts. So here we have data on fertility differentiation across education levels, and it's for the US, and you can see it's for different years. And as you can see, this relation between education and, for example, total fertility rates shifting over time. So you can see it was a higher. Look, if you look at this red line, and it went down. If you look at this green line, but then kind of it's shifting up. And another pattern we can notice is that for women with high education levels, you can see that over time, the fertility rates are becoming higher than before. I mean, higher than for middle kind of level educated people. For example, if you see this curves for 2010 and 2018, you can definitely see that the now high educated women are having more children again. And we also try to see if it is happening in other developed countries, and turns out you can also see similar patterns across most of the European countries and these rich North American countries. So here you can see, for example, different cases that, for example, if we look education level and its relationship to the total fertility rates, then you can see that over time there's also change. For example, education level over 10 years and more, it was used to be quite high, but it fell up, I mean, to 1980. But then after that, you can see that there is sort of stabilization happening. While for women with the lower education levels from 7 to 10, you can see that there's a decline, but it's kind of still going on. I mean, after 2000, still, I think it's becoming lower. But if we consider, for example, another sort of relationship between education and average levels of total fertility rates, then what we see is that there is also, again, we can see the shifts. First of all, if you'll see here this red curve, it is for 1965, and you can see it's kind of falling lower. For example, in 1975, it is much lower than in 1965. But if you look at the last one, 2010, you can see that there is sort of kind of upward sloping relationship is taking place, because that basically means that again, women with higher education levels, they're having more children. And we also did sort of considered the average total fertility rate for countries and over education. And here we can see a few developed countries, and you can see similar patterns. So with education, it's falling up to a certain point. For example, if you look at, I think this is Italy, it is falling up to, I think, 9 years of education, then it starts kind of picking up. And similar picture you can see also for Netherlands. So also it's falling up to 10 years of education and then starts picking up. And we also did a similar thing where we averaged all countries and tried to see what's happening on average. So you can again see over time the average total fertility rate was falling, but around 2000 and after, it's like maybe even becoming a bit higher than before. Here you can see it is oops, this area. So given this sort of evidence, then we try to come up with some explanation. So in order to do that, we of course looked at the literature, and we found three main kind of mechanisms used in order to explain how fertility evolves over time. So the first one is the trade-off between quality and quantity of children, introduced by Becker and Barrow, and then it's extended by other authors you can see here. But also some other authors, they also highlighted the role of externalities or external effects, and especially they mentioned about the people might care about the fertility of the people around them, or other externality was mentioned is the human capital. For example, if people around you are more educated, then that kind of also, at least, for example, improves healthcare and survival of kids, and all of them then kind of change the fertility kind of behavior of people. And the last bit is about childcare, and there are two ways of seeing it. First one is that in developed countries, they have childcare services provided by market. And here again, people can use childcare instead of looking after their own kids, and especially those with higher education levels, because they have usually a higher income, they can afford to hire this sort of market provided childcare. And the other point is also that because especially in this developed economies, women are participating in the market, I mean, in the labor market more and more. And that means that the part of this child care is done by fathers rather than mothers. And that also kind of turns out might change the fertility kind of behavior of people. And so we try to incorporate all these ideas and kind of develop our own model. So again, of course, it's not first time that people are trying to explain, especially this reversal of decline in fertility. So there are few papers, for example, Day 2016 and Futagami Konishi recently 2019, Okinata and Varvarigos 2019. So so all these papers, they try to explain reversal of fertility we observed in rich countries, but what they didn't take into account was, first of all, the social externalities were not taken into account. And so also the other thing is that when you care about the, I mean, when you account for the opportunity cost or the cost of childcare, they considered either the opportunity cost or direct cost. So we try to kind of take into account both of them. So there was also, for example, the Hirasawa and Yakita, they I think also accounted for the old generation, but in our case we tried to make it simpler. So we have only 2 generations, so we didn't actually take into account the effect of old generation. And the third thing that like in Hazan and Zoabi, we also incorporated childcare, but in our case, we kind of, our model kind of allows for the dynamic also rebound in the fertility rate, because in their case, it was a cross-sectional kind of approach. So given all this, then we developed our model. So the environment is quite standard overall. I mean, we have women that they have to choose their fertility rate, but the only thing here is that they also affected by social externalities, and there are 3 types of externalities: consumption, human capital, and fertility. And when I say fertility, that means fertility of other people around around them. And the agents live in 2 periods, childhood and adulthood. And so the adult agents, they have 1 unit of time, as usual in the standard OLG models, and there is no leisure. So they either work or they look after their children. And so they care about also their consumption, which in the first period includes also consumption of kids, so there is no separate consumption for the children. And they care about the number of surviving children to adulthood, and this survival rate is given, and it is also endogenous. And not only the number of kids, surviving kids, is important, but also their value, so-called quality, which is measured by their human capital in the next period, in the second period. So taking all these things into account, then we kind of developed our model. And so in very simple way, our model can be written as this. So here, this letters in red, that means that's what we added into the benchmark model as an extension. And that extension kind of is helping us to kind of answer those 3 points we raised in the beginning. So first, pi is the survival rate, so which depends also not only on the human capital of their parents, but also the benchmark capital in the human capital in the society. So if, I mean, society is more educated, then of course the healthcare will be better and survival rates will be higher. So it's possible that it will converge to 1. So and we know that in developed economies, I think the survival rate of children are quite close to 1. While if you go to poor economies, it might be less than 1. And second thing is the consumption externality, which this consumption externality has been considered in finance, for example, many times. There is something called keeping up with the Jones sort of effect, but the effect of this externality hasn't been considered in terms of fertility choice models. So I think this is a kind of a new thing. We hope that we introduced into the model. And the other two, the human capital externality, here we capture it by using average human capital, but it can be some sort of benchmarks, especially if you do, I guess, empirical work, then maybe you can also try to use other benchmarks. And N bar is also captures the fertility, average fertility in the society, which might also drive the fertility of individuals. So these things, especially the fertility of others and human capital externalities, they were actually considered in other models, but as here together, it is, I think, first time being considered. So the second thing we tried to change was this the budget. The budget constraint of the agents, which in this sort of models included as the income, which is just the human capital, because if you work, you can always normalize the wage to 1. So because of that, then income of an agent will be just his or her human capital level. But because we have fertility, then people need to spend some time looking after their kids, and also we have also direct cost of educating their kids, which is captured by this E, which is the cost of education. And this tau psi is the time cost or opportunity cost. And so the difference from existing models was that we included this psi, and psi here is it is a kind of a coefficient which can be 1 or less than 1. So if it is 1, that means you spend only your time to raise your kids. So you cannot hire anyone to help you. But with higher income, and as you can see here, the equation 3, here we are kind of explaining how this psi is determined. So if we assume that the childcare services require people with certain level of human capital. So if my human capital is higher than the people working in the childcare, that means actually my time is more expensive. So I better actually hire someone to look after my kids, and I can work myself. But if it is actually lower, that my income level is lower than the people who are working in childcare service, of course, I will not be able to hire anyone. So I will then spend all my time, the time required to raise a kid, which is how, and we assume that it's fixed and determined by nature. And the other thing is that we also take into account this human capital externality in education, and given in equation number 2, and which has been used in other also models. So given all this, then we can easily solve. Not easily, but
sorry,
yes.
Just to say you have 2 minutes left. It's just to inform you.
Okay,
You just
okay.
have 2 minutes.
I'm almost there. So so we solve for this choice variables, education, fertility, and consumption but since we are interested in consumption, so we did some analysis of this. I mean, not consumption, but fertility choice. So we did some analysis of fertility decisions of the equilibrium fertility rates, and we determined that the consumption externalities, that means if average consumption increases, then people tend to have less kids. I mean, that's the negative sign here. But at the same time, the effect of this externality is non-linear. That's, in other words, as country becomes richer, I mean, the average consumption levels become higher, then the effect of that consumption on fertility becomes also smaller. And that's this second part. And on the other hand, the fertility of other people is always positively related to individual fertility. So if all people are having more kids, then individual agent tend to have more kids. If they're having all fewer kids, then people tend to have fewer kids. That's basically how it works. And the last bit is about the human capital. So human capital effect is similar to consumption level. So here it's also with higher human capital, the individual fertility rates fall, but this effect is diminishing as the average human capital is increasing in the country. So I'll skip this part. So given all this, turns out we can explain not only, the steep decline in fertility, because the steep decline in fertility is caused by this additional effect of consumption fertility, consumption externality and human capital externality. But the last bit, the third point, we can explain also the reversal of the decline in fertility by putting all these things together. So first of all, with higher incomes, the externalities exerted by consumption and the human capital, they diminish. So because of that, higher incomes or higher consumption will not have much effect on fertility of individuals. But at the same time, because of the structural change in childcare and this social change, as I said, that, for example, husbands are looking after the kids more than before, all these things can lead to increase in this psi, which decreases the time spent on children. So turns out that has positive effect on fertility of at least high income people. So if this effect can change the average, then turns out because of that, because of the fertility externality effect, we can have that individual people will be then increasing their fertility. And so basically that's what is happening, and we try to support it using the simulating the model. And as you can see here, this red line is the actual observed cohort fertility rate, and this dashed blue line is what we found by simulating the model. And you can see that it's quite close to the observed values. And overall, the model kind of captures both the decline and stabilization after reaching some high levels of income. Am I finished or still have some time?
I'm afraid it's time to conclude.
Okay, then. Okay, so that's it. So basically, accounting for this externalities, consumption, human capital, and fertility externalities, I think we were able to explain both this steep decline in fertility in the earlier kind of stages of development, and kind of later when society reached certain high levels of consumption and human capital, then we can explain why this sort of reversal is happening.
Well, thanks a lot for this presentation, which was very rich. We have some time for questions. I don't know actually how much time we have for questions. We were a bit late because of me. So let's say we have, let's say 5 minutes for questions or something like that. I don't know if there is anyone with a question, you can just raise your little yellow hand. I have questions myself, but I see we have a question by Sheila Mishra. So please go ahead.
Hello, so thank you so much for this great presentation. I'm also working in this area, and like it is not completely the same, but I'm also working in this altruism and choices of children. So like I really appreciate the way you added those 4 variables in your study. And my question is is a clarification of the first budget constraint that you have used in your model, the first budget constraint. Yeah. So, so could you please elaborate on your first budget constraint? This is it.
So, okay, so if let's say that someone with this level of human capital works one period of time, and this is the income. If someone doesn't have any children, then that's the income. And so the person, because in my model there's no saving, so then that's the consumption. You consume all your income. But if you decide to have children, then you have to, first of all, let's say this N is 1, right? So then you have to spend some money on educating, and some time you have to also spend on just looking after raising the
kid.
Yeah, kid. Yeah. So that's why, because you see, that's why it's 1 minus. So you are spending time raising, and plus you're also spending some money on education. And what is left will be then consumed by the
parent, by the agent.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
As for me, I had a question about more at the micro level. So I understand from the paper that adding externalities, it contributes towards parameters to the model. So we have more degrees of freedom. So it's easier to replicate patterns like non-monotonic patterns, like the ones you are trying to replicate. So I see that it helps a lot. But at the micro level, I was really wondering if you could say more about, really how this affects the fertility decision in a way. Why are these externalities so important to explain this non-monotonic pattern and the fact that you have this fertility rebound? Because that's not obvious from a micro perspective. So I don't know if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
So, I mean, our explanation is that, as you can see here, we have the 3 variables added, and those variables capture the externalities. So these 2 variables, the first, consumption and human capital, we kind of explain it in the paper, but the basic idea is that this effect of these 2 variables are sort of concave. So they increase, but at diminishing rate. So at high consumption rate level or high human capital level, their effect on the individual fertility become kind of or stop growing at least. They don't. So at that point, it means as people become richer and they consume more, so the less and less the kind of society will be affecting your individual kind of decision on fertility. So then we also account for this childcare side. So if childcare becomes available, then richer people can have more kids, and that's already a documented fact. I mean, there is some information about that. Because first of all, they can send their kids to childcare, or they can just hire people to look after their kids. So their fertility increases, and we have seen it also when we looked at the data in the beginning. So higher, I mean, people with higher education levels, they tend to have more kids now. So that what that means is that at some point, this richer people start having more kids. And I mean, here maybe it might sound also a bit of speculative, but idea was that women with high educated women, they might become more like role models to others. It's, I mean, the social side. So if they start having more kids, then that then will kind of affect others through this fertility externality, and others will kind of follow the suit, and then overall the average kind of fertility increases. That was our kind of explanation, I think, intuitive explanation.
Okay, so thanks a lot for these extra explanations. So I see that this assumption 3 is as important, or probably as important as externalities in the explanation of the rebound. I mean, this third equation. Yes,
that's true.
But thanks a lot for this clarification. I don't know if
Thank you.
it's time for one quick question, or if there is no other question, well, I propose that we thank the presenter and we go to.
Thank
so
you.
thanks a lot for this presentation.
For allowing me to present here.
Well, you are welcome. Thanks a lot. I propose we go to the second paper by Hong Liu on housing wealth and fertility evidence from China.
Yeah, let me well. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So so it's a great pleasure to present our paper here. It's titled "Housing Wealth and Fertility Evidence from China." This is an empirical paper, and a typical empirical paper. So let's first look at the outline, the introduction. Well, the conventional economic theory predicts that increases in housing wealth driven by housing market booms will have a positive effect on birth rates, assuming that children are normal goods. Theoretically, an increasing in housing prices could affect fertility among homeowners through 3 channels. There are 2 types of positive wealth effects. One is the traditional wealth effect. It means that house value appreciation could increase the total value of household resources in the long run. Second wealth effect is home equity effect. It means that credit constrained homeowners can borrow against their increased home equity to fund childbearing. Meanwhile, there's a negative cost effect because when house price rises, it becomes costly to attain additional living space for the new child. Well, the recent study showed a consistent positive net effect on fertility in the developed countries. Based on the housing boom in the US, the housing bust in Japan, and also the housing market variation in Australia, Canada, and England. However, the manners in which housing wealth influences fertility decisions in the developing world is largely unaddressed in the literature. Well, the relative theoretically, the relative importance of the positive wealth effect and the negative cost effects of housing price increases may be different in developing countries. So this study tried to examine the impact of housing wealth change driven by housing market variation on homeowners' fertility in China. Over the past decades, there are 2 salient changes. We can observe a great housing boom from like 2003 through 2017. Meanwhile, there's a market downward trend in fertility. And we can also observe a negative correlation between housing price and the fertility rate at a province level. So this study tried to identify the causal effect of housing wealth on fertility by exploiting regional heterogeneity in housing supply that is determined by local geographic and regulatory land constraints in China. During China's recent housing boom, house price appreciation varied substantially across different geographic regions. So we construct instruments based on the housing supply. That is the interaction of water area in a city and lacked county government budgetary revenue from taxation. So we use a national representative data set from China Family and Panel Studies from 2010 to 2018. We find that for 100,000 yuan increase in lagged home value, that is about 15,000 US dollars. The likelihood of a woman giving a birth falls by 14% relative to compared to the average fertility rate in the sample. It implies a wealth elasticity of fertility around negative 0.32. This contrasts sharply with the findings in the developed countries because they mainly find a positive effect. Regarding the mechanism, we show little support of home equity extraction effect. It means that homeowners in China can hardly turn increases in housing wealth into liquid wealth to fund their child-related expenses. Second, we found some evidence of the cost effects. It means that women who own smaller homes are more negatively responsive to the housing price increases. And we also showed that our results are unlikely to be driven by China's one-child policy. We think our study contribute to the literature in three ways. First, it is one of the few studies to show that growth in wealth driven by a housing boom in emerging economies lowers birth rates. The literature on developing countries mainly investigates the literature investigates the determinants of fertility levels in developing countries, include economic growth, family resources, female education, labor market outcomes, and China's one-child policy, the rural institutional reform, and so on. So this study adds to understanding about the fertility transition in the developing world. Second, this study expands upon the work on housing wealth and fertility by investigating the potential mechanisms underlying the pattern that sharply contrast with developed countries. We highlight home equity extraction as a channel for the positive wealth effects of house price growth on fertility. In this paper shows some evidence for repressed wealth effects owing to capital market imperfections in China. Finally, we contribute to understanding the microeconomic consequences of changes in housing prices during China's transition period. The literature has studied the impact of housing price on consumption, savings, labor supply, co-residence, and marriage. And our findings about fertility suggest that housing wealth change may influence household welfare in both short and long runs. let me say something about the mortgage market in China. Actually, the mortgage market is quite rudimentary. Banks do not allow consumers to pay off an existing mortgage loan by taking on a second mortgage loan. And households with an outstanding mortgage can withdraw home equity only by selling their homes or borrowing from the non-bank credit market. Meanwhile, the home ownership is as high as 90% in China. Housing assets have become the largest component of Chinese household wealth. So Chinese couples' fertility responses to housing wealth shock could be interpreted as their responses to the change in the total household wealth. Well, conceptually, a rational couple makes fertility decisions by weighing the benefits of having a child against the costs. In developing countries, the home equity effect may be weaker because of the less developed financial markets, and the cost effect, the negative cost effect, may be stronger because households generally live with less adequate residential quality, and they have to update their households, their house for a new child. Therefore, we expect to observe a less positive or even a negative net effect of house value increases on fertility in developing countries compared to developed countries. As we already said that we use data from CIPS, it's a national representative data. We focus on women 24 to 45 years of age who are observed continuously in at least 3 rounds. And we focus on married women in home-only households. And we also exclude the movers between 2 waves. Our final sample has about 3,500 women, 6,200 women year observations. This is our econometric model. Here, INCT denote individual, community, county, and period. The dependent variable birth is a binary variable indicating whether woman I gave birth in the previous 2 years. That means between 2 waves. The key independent variable is the change in home value from wave T-2 to T-1. X include women's age, education, and the location of residence. Z is a set of community characteristics. Tall is counted by wave fixed effects. Although we control so many covariates, the change in home value may be endogenous due to reverse causality, self-selection, unobserved common factors, and measurement errors. So we employed IV strategy by exploiting exogenous shifts in housing supply that originate from land availability. So first, we use the area lost to wetlands, lakes, rivers, and other water bodies in each city as a measure of local geographic land constraint. And we then use the county government's budgetary revenue per capita as a measure for the regulatory land constraint. See, in China, although while the state owns all land, in theory, the prefectural and county governments are authorized to sell land use rights for up to 70 years and keep land revenue as an important source of extra budgetary funds. So insufficiency of the revenue from taxation is likely to incentivize local governments to sell more land and gain extra budgetary revenue. So we use the interaction between these two variables as the instrument for the change of home value. We control for the direct effect of these two variables, and the water is absorbed by the county fixed effect. And we expect a negative effect of this interaction on local land supply, and a positive effect on the change of a home value. So in this model, we control for county and wave fixed effect, and we also control a set of time-varying county level characteristics, because the county by wave fixed effects is perfectly collinear with the instrument. So this table shows the summary statistics for the mean, the key outcomes, the key variables. We can see that about 9.2% women gave birth during the previous 2 years. That is between two waves. And the basic home value did not differ between the two groups who give birth or not. But for a woman who give birth, the lagged home value change tends to be smaller. And these are individual and household characteristics, community characteristics, and county level characteristics that that are controlled in the regressions. So let's first look at the OIS results. In the first column, we observe a negative association between home value change and the likelihood of giving birth in the previous 2 years when we control for county by wave fixed effects. And in the second column, we find the negative association is robust to the control of household characteristics, more household characteristics. In the third column, we control for individual fixed effects. The estimates become insignificant. So in this table, we use the IV, we report the IV estimation results. We can see that the instrument, that is the interaction between these two measures, has a positive effect on the housing value change. And the first stage of the statistic is about 12.8, indicating a high relevance of the instrument in the first stage. The IV estimate in the second stage show that for 100,000 yuan additional increase in lagged home value, that is about 43% of baseline average housing wealth. The likelihood that a woman has given birth in the previous 2 years falls by 1.28 percentage points. That is 18% relative to the average fertility rate. And in the second column, we add controls for additional household controls, the interaction between basic controls and wave dummies. Third column, we control for community fixed effects. In the last two columns, we control for both community fixed effect and the additional household characteristics, and the results are all robust. Because we only have one instrument, the exogeneity of the instrument is basically untestable. So here we employ the bonding approach to help address concerns regarding the exogeneity of our IV. So this approach allows the instrument to be potentially imperfect IV and estimate the lower and upper bounds for a consistent estimator on the weaker assumptions. see this exercise provides support for the robustness of our IV estimates and then rule out any positive effect of home value changes on fertility. So let's look at the mechanism analysis. In this part, we compare fertility responses to local housing market booms between homeowners and renters following the literature using this specification. Here we use the sample of homeowners and renters. And the key independent variable is the change in the community level median home value. And we interact this variable with an indicator of home ownership. So if the home value growth has any wealth effects on the fertility of homeowners, we expect to see a positive estimate for CET2. Let's look at the results. Here, the IV results. We can see the interaction between these two variables is positive and significant. However, the results, this pattern may also result from a smaller negative cost effect for homeowners compared with renters. So here we further.
Sorry, Hong, may I just intervene? You have 2 minutes left. Is it okay for you? 2 minutes?
Okay. So here we further look at the results on household education expenditure, and we find insignificant results. So we think that there's no solid evidence for wealth effects. And we then try to explain why the dominant wealth effect does not exist here, and we basically compare household fertility responses across cities with more or less developed credit markets, and we find no only a modest effect. So the home equity extraction effect is very weak in China. And then we find that in this table, we find women with smaller homes show a more negative fertility response to home value increases than those with larger homes in China. So this is consistent with the prediction of the negative cost effect. And we also do 2 tests to show that our results are not driven by China's one-child policy. And finally, we look at the heterogeneous effects, and we can see that for older women and women who already have children, they also negatively responsive to home equity, actively to home house price increases. So these results indicate that a reduction in completed fertility. And here we find the negative effect is concentrated in women with higher education, higher education, and from urban areas. So we conclude that the results, our findings have some policy implications, not only for China, but also for other developing countries, because housing boom can be a trigger for the decline of fertility in developing countries with credit market imperfections. So economic and social policies may be effective in slowing down the decline in fertility and population aging for developing and transitional countries. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for your great talk. Now we have some time for questions. Let's see if you have some question. You can raise the little yellow hand. I have a question on my side. It's about this cost effect and
Sure.
the way we measure it in a way, because I understand that, of course, if all the houses become more expensive, then of course it reduces the extent to which you become richer when the price of your own house goes up. But I was wondering if you could come back on how you really measure this cost effect, because in a way, I mean, there might be some correlation between the prices of all houses, depending on the size of houses, and it's not clear. Well, at first glance, it's not clear how we can really measure and identify this cost effect. It was just my question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And this is a really good question. Actually, in the literature, it is very hard to directly measure their cost effect. But in theory, there are positive wealth effect and the negative cost effect. So in developed countries, they find the dominant wealth effect. So the net effect is positive on fertility. But in China, here we find a negative effect of housing price increase on fertility. So this suggests that the cost effect is dominating the positive wealth effect. So that is just what we can see about the cost effect. So in the paper, we try to show that the negative effect is stronger for those women who own smaller house. So they are more likely to buy a large house for a new child. So we interpret it as a suggestive evidence for the cost effect. It is consistent with the prediction of the cost effect. Yeah, we cannot provide strong evidence. Convincing evidence for the cost effect. So, yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for your reply. I see two other questions. One by Sheila Mishra and one by Radbeck. So please, Sheila, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you for the presentation, ma'am. And my question is following the previous question only, like how have you measured the house value in that slide? Like in the model specification, you mentioned that there is a variable called house value there. So what was the variable that you have used for determining this variable?
Well, the house value change is self-reported. In each wave of the survey, the household was asked about the value of their home, and we use. That's why we need to use the panel data. We calculate the change of their self-reported home value at time t and time t minus 1. So there may be a measurement errors. So that is also why our IV estimate is larger than the ORS estimate in the magnitude. And we need to use IV method to adjust the heterogeneity.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
And there's another question. What will be the last question by Radbeck?
Okay. Thank you, Hong. It was actually very interesting. My question is that it's very actually interesting that when asset price increase, people are somehow having fewer kids. I think there's something called the house affordability index. I mean, here in Australia we have something like that. So house price might increase, but maybe they're increasing faster than your income. So in that sense, maybe actually, even though your assets price are higher, but income might be relatively falling. So in that case, maybe you can see something similar what we found, but you are not really taking into account this ratio between house prices and income, right?
No, we didn't do that. We just, yes, as you said, there may be a confounding effect of household income. So in the model, we also control for household income to show the robustness of the results. in the mean specificity, we didn't control for it because it may be endogenous, as the literature also shows that housing wealth also affect the labor supply of household members, especially the labor supply of women.
Okay, maybe that's all. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for this presentation and for the discussions. I think it's time to thank the presenter and to go to the third paper by Olof Rosenqvist, How Family Background Shapes the Relationship Between Human Capital and Fertility. So you also have 20 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So, hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so my name is Olof Rosenqvist. I'm working at the Institute for Evaluation of Labor Market and Education Policy in Uppsala. And this work on human capital, fertility, and the role of family background is together with Francis Kramars at NCE in Paris and Oskar Nordström-Skans in Uppsala at Uppsala University. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so the starting point here is that there is a very large interest in the relation between human capital and fertility. There have been a lot of papers in that area, but I think it's fair to say that the focus has been on cross-country variation. So basically, there's a consensus that as a country's population becomes more educated, the fertility goes down, but it's less clear how education affects fertility at the individual level. For individuals that are born at the same time, that grew up in the same country, society. Here you can think about different mechanisms. So on the one hand, those who have higher education will have higher opportunity cost in terms of having children. And it can also be the case that if you're more educated, you are more informed about contraceptive methods and so on. So that would lead to a negative association. On the other hand, education and skills might be something that is attractive on the marriage market, and that can then increase the possibilities of having children. And it might be the case that these mechanisms work differently for men and women. And if you look at the raw associations between education or different skill measures and fertility, which typically are negative, almost always negative for women at least, it's very likely that they suffer from different degrees of omitted variable bias. And we argue in this paper that some of the most important or likely confounders here, they're going to be shared among siblings. So for example, family resources, preferences over education versus fertility, values or unobserved endowments. So we think it's interesting to see how these shared family factors how much of this negative association is driven by these family factors. So the contribution then is to compare raw associations between education and fertility to within family associations. And this is going to be informative about how the family background shapes the fertility skills relation. And we have different measures of skills, including non-cognitive skills here, which can be particularly interesting to look at here. So that's one thing. Another thing that we don't push so much in the paper is that these within family associations are arguably at least closer to what we can call the true causal relation between education and fertility. But there can still be of course, problems also within families. So we're not claiming that these are truly causal, but perhaps closer at least. So what we do in terms of empirics is that we try to provide comprehensive evidence on the role of shared family background. There have been previous papers looking at within family associations between education and fertility, but often they only look at women, for example, or they only have one measure of educational skills. We have population-wide register data from Sweden on both men and women, and we use a broad set of human capital measures. So it's years of schooling. We have compulsory school GPA. We look at cognitive ability, kind of IQ test, and also non-cognitive ability, which has not been looked at so much previously in the literature. And also the use of register data leaves us with pretty large samples of twins and close siblings, which I think is important because there have been some precision issues in the previous literature when it comes to the within family associations. And after presenting the results, we also have a quite simple theoretical framework to rationalize the patterns that we unravel. Okay, so something about the data in the study. As I said, we use population-wide Swedish register data. The most important register is a multi-generational register, which contain individuals in Sweden born between 1935 and 2017. And here they're also linked to the parents, so we can see the identities of the parents. And obviously in this register, we can see if the individuals themselves appear as parents later on. So we get the fertility measures from this multi-generational register. We proxy completed fertility with fertility at age 45. And at that age, we measured the number of children, if you have children at all. And we also look at the age at first birth. So since 2017 is the last year we observe children, we need the individuals to be born before 1973 to reach 45 years of age. And from this register, we can also identify twins. So the twins are going to be children that have the same parents, the same mother and father, and that are born in the same combination of year and month. And we only consider same-sex twins. But we have no further information about if the twins are dizygotic or monozygotic here. Okay, so that's the fertility and the child-parent relations. When it comes to skills and schooling, we have 3 separate data sources. For some cohorts of men, we have cognitive and non-cognitive test results from the military draft. And the cognitive test result is a kind of an IQ test. The non-cognitive test result is based on a conversation between the draftee and a psychologist, which assesses the non-cognitive or social skills of the individual. So for these measures, we can use the male cohorts between 1950 and 1972. And then we have compulsory school GPA, which is measured at around age 16. The draft scores are around age 18, 19. The compulsory school GPA is only available from 1985 and onwards, so we can only use a few cohorts for that measure, but it's available for both men and women. And then in terms of years of schooling, we can use a broad sample here, men and women born between 1935 and 1972. So that's the data we're working with. The empirical models in the paper are pretty straightforward. As I said, we are comparing the raw association between fertility and these skill measures and the within twin pair association. In terms of the raw association, we just regress the fertility measures on the different human capital measures, and we also include birth year fixed effects, so that we actually compare individuals, in the same cohort. So this is the model that we're going to use in columns 1, 3, and 5 in the tables below. Within twin pair association, we just estimate the model on samples of twins or also close siblings, but I'm going to focus on twins here today. And then we include a twin pair fixed effect in the model. And this is the model that we that we use in columns 2, 4, and 6 in the tables that I'm going to show you just in a bit. Okay, so starting by explaining fertility by years of schooling, let's focus on column 1 here. In panel A, we have women. We see that we have a very strong negative association between years of schooling and number of children. When we go to column 2, the twin sample, where we include twin fixed effects, you see that this negative association is pushed in a positive direction, and it almost disappears. It's still a little bit negative, but much weaker. If we look at the probability of having children at all in columns 3 and 4, it's the same thing. We start out with a clear negative association. It gets pushed in a positive direction and virtually disappears. If we look at men instead, here we see that we have a weak positive relation in the raw models 1 and 3. When we go to the twin fixed effect, we see this positive push again, so that the association between years of schooling and fertility gets more positive and really firmly on the positive side. Looking at age at first birth, here it's you need to remember that an older age at first birth is an indicator of lower fertility. So here we then expect it to go in the other way around here. So when you go from when you estimate this in the within twin model, the delay effect of having more schooling is lower than what it is in the raw association models. So columns 5 and 6 say the same thing basically as the other columns, but you need to think that remember that this measure is conceptually different. Okay, so that's years of schooling. If we look at fertility explained by compulsory school GPA, instead, where we have a smaller sample, we get very similar patterns. Again, looking at women in column 1, we see a clear negative relationship between the grade, the standardized grade, and fertility. When we use the within family association instead, this negative association disappears, and it's the same result for the number of children and for having children at all. Looking at age at first birth, we see first in column 5 in the raw association a pretty significant delay effect of the grades. It's still a little bit of delay in column 6, but again, it gets smaller when we estimate this within the family. For men in panel B, if we start with column 1 again, we see this positive relationship, looking at the overall raw association, which then gets stronger once we go to the family model with the twin fixed effects. We lose some precision here. You see that the number of twins that we can study for this particular measure is relatively small, but the pattern is still clear. We have this positive push, and the opposite thing when we look at age at first birth here instead. We see that age at first birth is less delayed when we estimate the model within families. It actually becomes a little bit negative, but virtually zero when we estimate the model within the twin pairs. So these are the measures that we have for both men and women, years of schooling and high school compulsory school GPA. Then we also have these draft skill measures, but they're only available for men. So it's this cognitive skill, which is similar to a standard IQ test. And then we have the non-cognitive skill, which is this assessment by the psychologist at the draft. And here we put them in simultaneously in the model. Looking at column 1, we see a little bit of a negative relationship between cognitive skill and number of children, and a very strong positive relationship between non-cognitive skill and number of children. And interestingly, when we then go to the within twin pair model in column 2, we see this positive shift for cognitive skill, as we saw before, for years of schooling and compulsory school GPA. But actually for non-cognitive skill, we instead see a movement in a negative direction. So it's still a very positive association, but it gets a little bit less so when we estimate it within family. And you can also see that the effects of cognitive skill and non-cognitive skill are sort of harmonized when we estimate it within families, so that they become more similar in how they relate to the number of children. When we estimate, when we look at having children at all, instead in columns 3 and 4, it's basically the same picture. We have a negative relationship between cognitive skills and having children. When we estimate overall raw association, it then becomes a little bit positive when we estimate it within families, but not so, but only marginally significant in this case. For non-cognitive skills, again, we instead have a negative push when we include the twin pair fixed effects. So it seems like non-cognitive skills stands out in terms of how family background is affecting the relationship between the skill measure and the fertility measures. And age at first birth, I think it's similar to what we saw before, at least for cognitive skill. Cognitive skill was associated with a delay when we estimated for the whole population. When we estimated within twin pairs, there is not much of a relation left in terms of delay. So these are our main results, and we've also estimated them for close siblings instead of twins. If you, for some reason, suspect that our twins are unrepresentative, we've also looked at close siblings that are born like 3 years from each other, and the results and the patterns look very similar, both for men and women, when we do it for close siblings instead of twins. Okay, so if we summarize here, we saw that the twin pair fixed effects push these estimates for schooling, grades, and cognitive ability in a positive direction. So it means that these shared family factors that tend to increase cognitive skills and education, at the same time, they tend to decrease fertility. But estimates for non-cognitive ability were pushed in a negative direction by the inclusion of the family fixed effects. So it means that shared family factors that tend to increase non-cognitive skills also tend to increase fertility. So on the basis of these findings, these patterns, we outline a very simple, stylized framework that can help us rationalize these patterns. And I'm just going to very briefly say something about them on the next few slides here.
Sorry, Olof, you have 2 minutes left. Is it okay for you?
That's okay. That's okay.
Thanks a lot.
So we have individuals here that produce educational attainment and fertility using cognitive skills, non-cognitive skills, and effort, which is going to be a choice parameter here. And total effort is restricted and must be allocated between fertility and education. And we also assume here that cognitive ability is more productive for education than for fertility. And that's also consistent with some of the results that we have in the paper. So that's for the children. Parents, they're going to invest in cognitive and non-cognitive skills of the children, and they need to allocate these investments between the skill types. So all siblings get the same investment, but skill levels also depend on a random component, which varies across siblings within families. And the third component is that the children inherit the parents' preference weights for education and fertility. So the family-specific utility function is going to be like in the bottom here. You have education, production of education weighted by this preference weight, and production of fertility weighted by the weight. And then we have an optimization. So children choose effort in fertility education to maximize utility. Parents choose investment to maximize utility. And because of these, because both these choices will depend on the family-specific preference parameter, you're going to have this, in the simple case, you're going to have a separation into two families. If the preference for education is below 0.5, all effort going to be put into fertility, all investment going to be in the non-cognitive ability. And opposite if the weight for education is above 0.5. So when you compare families, then when you use between family variation, you're going to have this positive bias for non-cognitive ability on fertility, but you will introduce a negative bias for cognitive ability, which is consistent with what we saw just before. I think I can skip this one. So let me conclude. So we analyzed how within twin pair associations between fertility and skills schooling differed from the overall raw associations. And our results suggest that these raw associations that are negative for women and very close to zero for men, to a large degree reflect differences across families. For men, the relations become consistently positive when we account for family background, and for women, in most cases, the relations become close to zero when we account for family background. Yes, and a possible reason for this pattern that we observe is endogenous accumulation of skills, together with an intergenerational transmission of preferences for education versus fertility. So parents who value fertility over education invest in their children's non-cognitive skills, and the children who inherit these preferences supply more effort in fertility than in education, which then gives this very strong relationship between non-cognitive skills and fertility when you estimate it in the overall population. Yes, okay, thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Olof, for this great presentation. It's difficult not to be impressed by the differences that you find in the overall sample, and then just looking at twins or close siblings.
Yeah.
Is there any question? I have some questions which concerns the explanation that you provide for this. I'm not sure to be entirely convinced by this issue of family background, but maybe it's just that I'm not completely understanding the interpretation of the results. If we take basic socialization models like the Bizin-Verdier settings, where you have a combination of vertical and oblique socialization, I mean, children will take the preferences either of the parents or of a role model drawn randomly in the population. And this has been applied to fertility choices by Thomas Baudin. You have a model where you have traditional families valuing fertility a lot, and then, let's say, modern families valuing education more. So this exists in the literature. But in these models, I'm not sure to see why we should have different results if we focus on twins, close siblings, or if we look at the overall population. I have difficulties to see. I mean, the socialization process, is more or less the same. There's a bit of randomness in it. And so could you come back on this explanation, why the family background may explain the results you get?
Well, obviously from the results, it must be the case that something in the family background is simultaneously affecting fertility choices or fertility behavior and the accumulation of skills or education. because otherwise the results wouldn't look like this. And exactly how these processes work, we're not sure, of course. We provide some very simple framework here. But I guess in some families, they are really interested in their children having good careers and high possibilities of a high consumption and getting utility from that kind of activities. And then when you bring your children up, you try to give them a lot of skills that are helpful for being successful on the labor market. And at the same time, you might down prioritize skills that are more helpful on the marriage market or fertility market.
So you would interpret your results as suggesting that vertical socialization dominates oblique socialization or horizontal socialization. This is how you would interpret your result.
Yeah, yes, I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks a lot for this clarification. Is there any other question about these results and how we can interpret these? So please raise your hand if you have any question there. I see a question by Radbek Sumachev. So
Yes,
please go ahead.
Olaf, it's a very interesting result, actually. So my question is, so what you find is that it's a bit interesting that with higher education level, people tend to have fewer kids, right? That's the result we got.
Yeah, if you look at the raw association, it looks like that. But if you look within families, this relationship becomes positive for men and very close to zero for women.
Okay, overall, you mean that basically means that with high income, I mean, if you take into account that sibling effect, then people tend to have more kids, right? Is it? How can we interpret your result? I mean, high education with people with high education tend to have more kids if you account for all other sibling effects.
Yes, at least for men, that seems to be the case. But the relation is still very close to zero for women. But
thank
yeah,
you.
I mean,
I was just asking this question because in my paper I was telling that the income effect, the high educated people tend to have more kids. So there is some sort of, I guess, evidence which maybe supports it, at least indirectly.
Yeah, I think it's consistent with what you said before to some extent.
Thank you.
Well, is there any other question or clarification question or not? So maybe it's time to thank the speaker for this great talk, and it's time to go to the last paper of this session by Paola Bertoli on birth outcomes in hard times among minority ethnic groups.
Okay, I hope that you are seeing my screen. Otherwise,
yes,
just
we
let
can
me
see.
know.
Thanks a lot. Yes.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the introduction and for the chance to keep presenting this paper. It's always nice to discuss about it. And as you can see, it kind of moves a bit away from the main topic that has been discussed so far. So the bottom line of our interest, rather than really fertility decision or fertility, is actually at birth. As you can also see, this is not just my work, but it's a co-author paper with a colleague from the University of Sapienza in Rome and another from the University of Netherlands. So to be more precise, what we are interested in, what we are studying here, is the impact, if any, of hard times, so of economic crisis, on the health at birth of immigrants, so minority ethnic groups. There is a large body of literature on the relationship between business cycle and health at birth in general. And the relevance is quite obvious since all the effect that health at birth can have in driving future performances of individuals under many different dimensions. So from, of course, health in adulthood, but also skill or even wage. So far, the evidence that has been provided is quite mixed or conflicted, if you want. We have positive relationship that has been observed for countries like the US and Spain, where, however, the effects seem to be driven by a selection of the women that were giving birth during economic recession, while in other countries where these selections seem not to take place, we observe a negative relationship. So we go from Sweden to Netherlands, Denmark, or Argentina, and so on. So what we do here is consider Italy as a reference institutional setting. And as economic downturn, we exploit the 2008 Great Recession. So we exploit an external shock, which is also a specific event. An event that has been considered as one that had much stronger consequences or impact than a previous economic crisis. So among the contribution that we have, for sure, there is how we capture the spread of the recession. So I'm going to discuss a bit this during the when we approach the empirical strategies. So we try to retain as much variation as possible in our data set. And so we move away from the normal measure of, let's say, economic impact. We also do not stop at analyzing the average effect, but we try to dig deeper into the dynamics of these effects. So we run a set of heterogeneities, trying to identify the drivers. So what characteristics makes immigrants more or less exposed to the consequences of the crisis? And then as a minor point, if you want, we were the first, at least at the time of the writing of the paper, at checking the effect of the GR on infant health. So far, there were mainly papers looking at the effect on adult health. We can rely on a quite detailed data set. We are working with individual data that comes from what we call the patient discharge record that are collected and then they were provided us by the Ministry of Health. So we know all the, we have information on all babies that were born in the countries, basically. What I'm going to show you are the results on immigrants' newborns, because that's our focus, but in the paper there are also all the analysis done for the Italian one. So I can tell you a sort of comparison of what was going on. These were newborn that were born in between 2003 2014. So it means that were conceived between 2002 2013. We work with individual data, but we also collapse them at the municipality level. So among the main information that we have the municipality of residence of the mother and also the ethnicity of the mother. So that's how we can distinguish immigrants from Italian newborn national. And we use the municipality level to be able to identify or capture the effect of the Great Recession. We do not work with all municipalities. We just look at the northern and central part of the countries. And this is done for two main reasons. The first one is linked to the distribution of immigrants in the country. That are mainly concentrated in the northern and the central part. Also, during the economic crisis, the presence of immigrants in this area was not affected. So we don't have a change in the immigrants' share. And they also are more quite homogeneous than immigrants compared to those in the south. So this is the first reason why we decided to kind of cut some region of the analysis. Plus, the northern and the central part of the countries were the one most affected by the Great Recession because they are the most industrialized one, and also the one where the most affected sectors are still concentrated. So I'm talking about the manufacturing and the construction industry. So here the black areas identifies the municipality most affected with the higher presence of the manufacturing and construction sector. So you can see the difference between north and central and the southern part. So these leave us with overall 540,000 deliveries, newborns. We also, this is our main data set and the one that we will use to compute our outcomes of interest. We also have some secondary data set, in particularly on the distribution of immigrants across Italian municipality. And we also reconstruct the presence of immigrants association in the countries. So where they are located and the activities that they do, and also, for example, if they are specific for, if they refer or they're meant for a specific ethnic group, or they are just a general immigrants association. So using this data, we construct our outcome of interest. There are 3 dummies, and they simply follow what is usually employed as main outcome when at birth is at stake. So the first dummy tells us if the baby was born weighing less than 2.5 kilo. The second, if it was very low weight, so under 1.5 kilos. And the third one, if the baby was born before the 37th gestational week, so if it was a preterm. Of course, they are correlated, so they are sort of interchangeable proxies of the same phenomenon that we want to study, which is poor health at birth, but still they are not, they capture different aspects. Okay, so for example, it's not that all preterms are necessarily low weight or very low weight babies. Now, what I find more interesting is how we capture the spread of the Great Recession. Here we use our third type of data. Actually, normally what is done to capture economic crisis is to look at the unemployment rates, which is, of course, I mean, it would have been great. We would have liked to do that. But usually unemployment rates, to be meaningful, are provided to let's say, greater geographical reference than municipalities. In our context, these are provided at a provincial level. So we will have lost a lot of variation in our data set. Plus, we all know that unemployment can affect the fertility decision as well as behavioral decision, as for example, how much prenatal care to consume. So we would have introduced endogeneity. Another approach that has been proposed is to use basically the prices that comes from the residential market, so residential real estate market prices. This was still not our best option, since again there is a reverse causality problem, and again a problem of potential endogeneity, because we know that those individuals that tends to have kids during economic crisis are also more likely to be the one that prefer to buy a house. So that is why usually in the paper that exploit this type of, let's say, proxy, they combine it with an instrumental variable approach. Then what we thought about is, instead of looking at the prices of houses, why not to look at the prices of stores? So what we are using here is information data related to the commercial real estate market, and we use them to construct our basically our indicator of the spread of the Great Recession. And then we basically replicate a difference in difference approach, to be more precise, a staggered difference in difference approach. The data that we have comes from the Land Agency Authority. For all the observational period and all our municipality, we have information on the minimum and maximum price per square meter of store. Actually, the prices comes specified for cluster of predefined store divided by commercial position and position within the municipality. So we decided to focus on the prices of the stores that are within the center of the city. So there are downtown. This is because the supply of stores, it's almost inelastic in this part of the city. It could be that you have changes in the activities that are done within the stores, but it's very unlikely that you have a lot of stores that are moved to become flat or vice versa, because like the administrative procedure and so on is not that easy. And then we focus on stores that are in normal commercial location. This is done just to avoid prices that are extremely high, extremely low due to really unusual position, like we were basically like excluding stores that were located in San Mark Square in Venice, or I don't know, in front of the Pisa Tower. So something that is really unusual. Once that we have this selection on the price of stores, we basically take the average between the minimum and the maximum price, and we calculate the growth rate of these prices. And then we create our indicator of the Great Recession as a dummy that takes value 1 from the first year since the start of the recession, that for Italy was 2008, in which the rate of growth of commercial activities becomes negative. So this is a sort of ready interaction between what we will usually include in a difference in different settings, so the post dummy and the treated dummies. Post, because we are considering just the period that comes after the recession, so the starting of the recession, and the treated because it's just the one where the effect is strong. We are, of course, exploiting the severity of the crisis because, of course, to some extent, all municipalities were affected. So that's why we're replicating a definitive approach. What we obtain, we think, is it's a pretty good proxies of the Great Recession, and I think that you can see it if you compare the trend in our GR indicator with, or better, if you compare the trend in store prices and the one in unemployment. So if you take as a reference the red vertical line that indicates the starting of the crisis, you see that in the period, you have that the unemployment represented by the dashed line decreases while the store prices increases. And you have the reverse basically from the starting of the Great Recession. The two measures are quite correlated and significantly and highly correlated. We could discuss on how we define the GR. So I'm just telling you what has been used to produce the results that I'm going to show you, but we have tons of robustness check. So to alternative definition, starting from using, instead of the dummy variable, the continuous variable. So the continuous version of the growth rate, okay? We kept as baseline the dummy because these allow us to avoid to include the small recovery that was registered around the year 2010, where the economy in Italy seems to kind of be able to get out from the crisis, but actually was really temporary because in 2011 we have the second wave of the recession that was even worse. Just to give you an idea, between 2011 and 2014, we had like the GDP that dropped by 9%. Just an example, these are two Italian cities. On the left, you have Milan, and on the right, you have Bologna. So for Milan, this is the trend in our in the growth rate of the store prices. Here is the kicking of the crisis, and you will have that Milan is treated since 2009, where you have this negative rate. For Bologna on the right, instead, it started to be treated since 2008. If you want, that's how the spread of the pandemic of the crisis worked for us. So this would be 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's how it kind of developed, and it makes sense also with previous paper that kind of analyze exactly the spread of the crisis. Coming to the formalization of the model, it's pretty standard and simple. We have the outcome that measure at the individual level, so it refers to the newborn I that was born in municipality M but conceived at time T. We have our proxy of the GR, so this is what we are interested in, and we have a set of fixed effect. Municipal fixed effect, consumption year fixed effect. We also include macro area trends and macro area trends fixed effect, and some controls at the level of the education at the municipality level. Because unfortunately, when we look at the information of the babies, we do not know much about the socioeconomic characteristic of the mother. We know a lot about her health condition, but for the socioeconomic characteristic, we don't know the education, neither the income. So we had to kind of overcome the problem looking at the average value at a municipal level. We cluster at the municipality level, but also here we could discuss this choice, and we have robustness check with alternative clusters, starting from cluster at the local health units. So at the level, the geographical level of the provision of health services. These are our results. The average effect, you see that the Great Recession increased the likelihood for immigrants, newborns to be low weight, very low weight, as well as preterm. Just to give you a flavor, at least of low weight, here we are talking about an increase in the probability of being low weight by 8.7%. These results are run on the sample of singletons, but we also did it on multiples deliveries, and the effects are there. If we look at what happened at Italians, we have the same type of effect. The magnitude is much smaller, but there is a worsening also for the health outcome of Italians. This is the average effect. Then, of course, we run all a set of robustness check, inserting further controls, starting from mother's age, the average income at the municipality, at the level of the municipality of residence of the mother. We add ethnicity fixed effect to control for difference propensity, for example, to consume prenatal care. We control for population density with the idea that wealthy area will be also more populated. We put all together all these control individually and also all together. We include regional trends to consider the fact that the provision and also the new measure for the provision of health services during the crisis are all taken at the regional level. And of course, we are replicating a difference in difference approach. So we check for any anticipatory effect. So we did an event studies with leads and lags, and everything is confirmed, everything is robust. If there are questions, I will show you the table and the graph. Otherwise, for the sake of time, you will have to just trust me for now. Okay.
Sorry, Paula, you just have 2 minutes left. Is it okay for you?
Yeah. I will just tell you what we do, and then if there are questions, I will go deeper, because we do a lot. So at least you have the full picture of the baseline. So what was going on is there. Then we play around on the dynamics of the effect. So we run an heterogeneity analysis, try to understand which characteristic of the immigrants could help them to protect from these negative consequences, or could exacerbate the consequences. What we look at as drivers are basically the network on immigrants might rely. So we look at the size of the ethnic group to which the mothers belong at the municipality level. We look at the presence of immigrant association, the distance from the mothers to the closest immigrant association, the existence of an association meant for the specific ethnicity of the mother. And then we look also some characteristics in terms of the job market. So we look at the overqualification of immigrants female, or the involvement of the ethnic group of the mother in the most affected sector at the national level, so construction and manufacturing. But we also reconstruct which were the specific sector most affected within each municipality, as also, so we also check for the involvement at the municipality level. And what we learn is basically that being near to an immigrant association or living in a municipality with more association helps to kind of dilute the effect of the Great Recession. While on the opposite, these effects are exacerbated where there are a high level of female overqualification or high involvement of the specific ethnic group of the mother in the most affected sector at the national and municipal level. There is no effect instead when we look at the presence simply of immigrants in the municipality, so say the size of the ethnic group or the fact of having an association that is meant for your ethnicity. I'm concluding just telling you that we also check for composition effect. So we make sure that there is not a change in the immigrants. So we know that at the national level, in the northern and central part, the presence of immigrants is not affected by the Great Recession. We also wanted to make sure that it is not a reallocation across municipality, and that's not the case. But what we see is that is the type of immigrants female that changes, especially we check that with respect to the presence or the distance to immigrants association. So we see that the healthiest immigrants and the one with the higher consumption of prenatal care are the one that tends to be more located close to immigrants association or where there is a higher number of immigrants association. We also check for in utero selection. So we saw that where we are far from the immigrants association or the lower number of immigrant association, actually there is a tendency to have more female newborns, and that could partially explain why or have an effect when we look at the weight of babies. So concluding, we see that the GR negatively impact at the birth, especially for immigrants. The negative effect is driven mainly by, if you want, by the, how can I say, we see that the burden of the crisis on immigrants newborn is driven by their ethnicity involvement in the sector most affected by the crisis, and also by the lack of diversification of the economic sector in which their ethnicity is involved. And I can tell you that we checked this also on the Italian sample, and there were no effect in this sense. So overall, if you want, our findings suggest that relative to natives, immigrants in Italy start of their life cycle with more disadvantages during time of crisis. And this could translate into a widening of the socioeconomic gap between natives and immigrants later on. So it will be important for policies that aim to ease the economic burden during an economic downturn episode to weight in the extra obstacle that minorities are subject to. In this sense, the role of immigrant association could be kind of highlighted more, could be more supported. And with this, I hope that I was on time, and thanks for listening to my presentation.
Well, thanks a lot, Paola, for this great talk. Is there any question? In the meanwhile, I have a question about the role of anticipations and expectations. Yeah. I think on one slide, you seem to be suggesting that expectations were not playing a role. So could you?
No, there is no anticipatory effect. So basically, yes, we just check that the weight and very low weight amplitude were not changing before the kick-in of the crisis. And then actually we see that if it happens after, and especially it takes some time for the effect to basically materialize. So it's not an immediate effect.
Okay, see. Now, is there any other question about this role of the Great Recession and its impact on the health of children? So please don't hesitate to raise your hand if you have any clarification question.
But I understand it's a long session, many papers.
Well, I don't see any particular question at this stage, but the main result is clearly the role of associations in trying to reduce the burden of this crisis. So that's an important result.
Yeah, they are quite
Yes, so I don't know if there is no other question. Maybe we are just on time. We are maybe 2 minutes before the end. So I don't know if there is any other remaining question about this last paper. Well, if not, maybe we should just thank all the participants, all the speakers for all these interesting results and sharing this with us. I don't know if there is anything else to add at this stage. Claus, do you want to say a word?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for the presentations, which make clear that our papers are outstanding and interesting and to the development. I also should mention that while we are recording it, it will be available at some time on the GLO website, and it will be also used for further PR campaigns. Yes, this is basically also what we are doing today. So the presentations were not meant to be defeated, yes, so to speak, in the sense it's important that we work out what is relevant. So thank you very much for participating. I'm now closing the recording, stopping the recording.